All right. Well, it's 11. I'd say, why don't we go ahead and get started? And I know more people will probably be joining us as well. But Annie, it's good to see you. Welcome. I'm excited to introduce to you on our coffee hour this morning. We're actually going to be brewing coffee with my friend Annie Denton with Red Cedar Coffee. And I happened to meet Annie through the Goldman Sachs 10,000 Small Businesses program a few months ago. And I asked if she might be willing to be a guest on our coffee hour and talk to us about coffee. But one of the things that really fascinated me when I talked to you, Annie, our first opportunity to meet and talk with one another was your background was in political science, and you were living in Washington, D.C. And you are now here and co-owner of a coffee shop and the director of sales and marketing. Could you share a little bit with everyone about how you happened to come back home and start up this business after your life in DC, which was a whole lot different than your life today?
Exactly. Well, thank you, Lynn, for the invitation to come in and speak on coffee this morning. And hello to everyone. Thanks for joining us today. So, yeah, as far as getting involved with coffee, it's sort of a family affair. I'm second generation, and my father grew up in Central and South America, so around coffee producing farms, processing mills, and he got to experience coffee firsthand. Quite frankly, growing up, when my grandparents and my aunts and uncles would talk about back in the day when they were living in Mexico, Venezuela, and Brazil, I just kind of thought, well, these are family stories. Okay. So throughout college, though, I was working in coffee shops. And after graduating from Ohio University, I moved out to DC and spent time putting my degrees to work. And but I did have the opportunity to go to Brazil. I have some friends down there, and spent a couple of months. Got to experience coffee firsthand, the coffee culture, the view of coffee from a producing country. And I thought, Red Cedar's getting up and running and everything. And there is something kind of neat about coffee. So I was part of, I like to say, the brain drain leaving Ohio, and then the brain gain. so, so fast forward all of these years, we are, Larry, my father and I are co-owners of Red Cedar Coffee Company. We're located in Berea, and we tackle coffee from the roasting side of the equation. So we import from these coffee growing regions, and we import the raw product. We do the processing, the roasting on site, then we distribute. And so the background, though, our family ties to these coffee producing countries has come into play because, prior to COVID, I was the green coffee buyer. So I would go to the farms, meet with the processing mills, meet with the producers, and in some opportunities, they would actually let me be involved in the processing of our own direct lots of coffee. And so it's kind of nice to have that full circle viewpoint here within the company. And then we've also hosted some of these family members too from these farms, these direct trade producers, at our facility in Berea, so they get to see what it's like once their crop leaves and has been exported out of the country, and what happens to it.
Yeah. You shared a little bit about the families that are growing the coffee and some of the challenges and environmentally. I mean, I thought it was incredible and things you don't even think about. Can you talk a little bit about some of the challenges that folks are faced with in order to even produce or grow the crop?
Sure. So to kind of put it in perspective as to where coffee is grown, it's grown within 1,000 miles north and south of the equator. So that's in the industry is referred to as the coffee belt. And you think of a lot of those countries that where the coffee is being grown, they've got domestic challenges. They also have environmental challenges. And so with that, there are impacts of climate. And where a lot of the producers will see that will be, they are growing coffee at about 6,000 feet above sea level. And they've been growing within that area, sometimes 3, 4, 5 generations back. And now with some of the changes in climate patterns, they're having to move the new plantings further up the hill, up the mountainside. You get to a point where you run out of mountain. And so when I was in Costa Rica in February, one of the producers was showing me his new farm that he hopes that in 15 years time, it'll be up and running, producing coffee. And you have to worry about frost threats at that elevation.
Right.
He said, if you asked 15 years ago if he would be planting at that elevation, he'd say, you're crazy. But he wants to pass the family farm tradition down to his son. So 15 years from now, he's hoping that there'll be healthy plants that will be growing at that altitude.
Oh my gosh. How has the pandemic, how has that challenged you in order to be able to continue doing what you all do in your business?
Mm-hmm. So it's been challenging in terms of supply chain interruptions. So a lot of the countries in Central and South America were trying to get ahead of COVID, and so they instituted very harsh lockdowns. So in some of these countries, some of the information did not get out to the producers or to the micromills that they were exempt. So basically, like in our phrases, essential workers. And so they only get one shot at harvest, and so you'll have the possibility of impact that these producers might not see an income until perhaps next year. In the case of some other countries, the hospital systems are very taxed to begin with, and so they only might have a couple dozen ventilators, and so that's created challenges in terms of they're trying to protect their hospital resources. But going down the pike, what's going to be interesting here is that in the case of, let's say, Costa Rica, so February is considered peak of harvest, which is when most coffee roasters try to time their visits. And so at least a number of the families had an opportunity to make arrangements to sell their crop.
Okay.
Guatemala did not have that chance. They fall about a month behind. So this upcoming February, from a lot of our producers, are saying that they're nervous because this will be the first time that they don't anticipate having anyone really coming to the farms to select their coffees.
Oh, wow. How will you select it? Are there other ways that you can manage that?
Yeah, so for our direct trade relationships, these are some families that I've been working with for the last 4 to 7 years. So they know what it is that I'm looking for. In some cases, they've seen firsthand what we do here. And so think of it kind of like putting in an order. This is what I'm looking for, and can you process this coffee this particular way? And they know that there is a financial commitment too, which is important. And so I get pre-shipment samples. So typically, if I was at the farm, I would be evaluating coffees on site and then taking samples back here to the States to evaluate. And so what I'll be getting are basically these pre-roast samples that'll come in. And when they send them up here, we do our testing with the roasting. And we keep in fairly constant communication through WhatsApp. And so I understand what's going on at the farms and what they're working through. So for some of the countries, I don't see that will be as heavily impacted as as others.
Wow. But you don't anticipate that it'll have any interruption for your business in order to get that coffee and be able to do that. You're pretty confident that you'll have the supply you need.
Confident, I would say confident as long as the containers, the shipping containers are in the proper port where they're supposed to be. So when Southeast Asia went into lockdown earlier, a lot of those containers were held up in those ports, and globally they're expecting containers to be circulating throughout. And so you had a situation where you couldn't, in a coffee producing country, they could not find an available container. So there's some controls that they can do there to protect the crop. So we did have late arrivals coming in, and I expect that'll be the same thing, coming forward. So
Wow.
yeah.
Is this a busy time of the season for you as a coffee roaster?
So our busy season sort of overlaps with the academic schedule. So from Labor Day to Memorial Day, but our peak of production is in the last quarter of the year. So typically we're roasting the first half of the week. And now this week we'll be on schedule for 6 days of roasting.
What's that process like? What does that involve?
So we start off with these little coffee beans, and I'm going to try to show these here because they're quite interesting. This is what an unroasted. I'm trying to see here. The lighting might not be as the best, but it's a little tiny coffee bean, and visually you can tell the difference. But there is water moisture that you have to take into consideration when roasting, as well as the bean density. So how dense the coffee bean is. And so we have sort of like, if you think along the lines of baking, we have our set recipes. So depending on where the coffee is coming from and the roast style, we chart it out. Time and temperature. So the longer the coffee is in the roaster, for a higher temperature, the darker the roast.
Okay.
And so as the coffee roast progresses, the coffee bean expands. So the coffee bean that I just showed, I've got a medium roast in this hand here, dark roast here, same coffee bean and everything. It's expanded. And then also too, the darker roasts become much more oilier because it's just drawing out those oils that are inherent inside the coffee bean.
Okay. How long does it take to roast that? So if you're going to do a dark roast, how long are you roasting that?
So depending on where the coffee comes from, it's anywhere from like 17 to 20 minutes. Medium roast, depending on where the coffee comes from and the way that we're roasting it, how dark into the medium or how deep into the medium roast spectrum, then that can be about 14 to 17 minutes.
Wow. Do you employ a lot of staff at your coffee company?
We have quite a few in production, and then we also have front of house sales staff as well.
Wow. How did you didn't just know how to do this, and especially coming from your background, how did you learn all of this? I mean, was this something your dad grew up doing? Did he know how to do all of this?
Knowing how to do it all, no. I can speak honestly as his daughter. So he had previously worked with Nestle, and so he understood the business side of the coffee industry. And then about 20 some years ago, he started spending more time getting involved with roasting. And so it's been kind of a lifelong pursuit of his that he always wanted to be involved in coffee. And fortunately, he was in a position that he could do something working for himself. And then now, of course, I'm on board with him as well. But yeah, we were always tinkering with roasts. and I say tinkering in that it's an agricultural item. So one year to the next, there's going to be fluctuations and that sort of thing. So we're working on sample roastings, trying to figure out the best recipe, so to speak, for that that particular harvest. And so, yeah, it's we do a lot of industry events as well, too. So always working on honing those skills.
And your consumers are companies that come in and purchase your product to serve in their establishments, as well as individuals who come into your retail component as well, right?
That's right. So we started off with the plan of being exclusively a wholesale roasting company, supplying to cafes, restaurants, specialty food markets. Where you start isn't where you finish. So as we continue to grow, we started developing our own retail lines. So oftentimes when our product is sent to the delivered to the cafes, then it's our name is like the name behind their brand. So we've been working on growing our name recognition, brand recognition.
Yeah, I mean, I think about that as a business. It's not only knowing how to serve a quality product, but also establishing all those relationships and building that sales side of it, which you've been really involved in as well. Annie, we had a question that came up when you were talking about the farmer planting his crop up on the mountain and that it would be 15 years before that crop will be ready. Does it take that long for the plants to mature and be able to produce?
So typically, and it's there, you get all the weather variables, the difference in the soils. And so typically once a coffee tree has been planted in the farm on in the new lot, that usually happens about 9 months after the coffee bean sprouts its roots, and then later the leaves. So you'll get your first indication as to how happy that plant is, so to speak, at about year 4, 3 or 4. And it depends on the varietal, because there are some varietals that are extremely delicate. They have a very low crop yield, and so they take a lot longer to get established. Okay. And so typically what they will say for a banking viewpoint, for instance, if a coffee producer is looking for financing to expand or buy the new little coffee trees, it's about a 20-25 year commitment. So those trees need to get rooted, and then you have to do cuttings, basically kind of rotating a little bit in terms of how drastic of a cutting you do on a section of your farm. So yeah, it's and in this particular case, very high elevation and coupled with the frost threats, he's sort of in uncharted territory, but there are a lot of coffee producers that are facing the same challenges and are trying to figure things out going forward.
Wow. Another question from Jody. She was asking, is your coffee shade grown organic, fair trade?
So we have multiple certifications for our coffees, depending on where the coffees come from. So we do have a line that's fair trade certified organic, and those, we have all the documentation that goes back to the farms. Those are working with cooperatives. And so yes, we have a line that's like that. And they also carry the shade grown certification. Our direct trade coffees are the ones where these producers, in some cases, have to use pesticides or fungicides because of pests. You have this broca, this coffee borer beetle. So if they don't get a handle on it within 10 days, they lose the entire section of the farm. And so we do have some of those coffees that, I understand with the climate change, why they might not be able to harvest organically, but also any of those certifications, fair trade and shade grown certifications are very expensive for the producers. So they're looking at about $5,000 application fee, and then all documentation going back several years. So some countries you're just not going to find fair trade organic coffee.
Okay. It's a lot that goes into this. Do you want to share with us some roasting tips?
Sure.
Or some brewing tips?
Some brewing tips. All right, cool. So one of the things I wanted to just kind of throw out there, since we were talking about a little bit about coffee, coffee growing at the farm level. So I have a bag of this Finca Las Torres from one of our direct trades from Costa Rica. How many coffee trees do you think were involved in growing this particular pound bag of coffee? I'm just kind of curious, maybe if some of the attendees can write in the chat how many trees they think were involved in
that
growing
1
pound bag of coffee.
Oh my gosh. Any guesses out there? Let's see, we got one.
Okay.
Someone said 10 trees.
10 trees, okay. Anyone else? So the annual harvest of one tree is what I am holding in my hand.
Wow. Oh my gosh.
So when you're at some of these farms, you are seeing tens of thousands of trees. And when we hosted one of the families with us, they were excited because they were getting a break. They had planted, before they came up to see us, 40,000 coffee trees.
Oh my
And I
gosh.
figured they'd have a little bit of a break and all. So yeah, a lot of time, attention goes into this coffee, and then it's handpicked. So very, very labor intensive. So when it comes to sort of like the tips on how to get the most out of your coffee brewing at home, I would just like to mention that, like anything in life, you can make it as complicated as you'd like or as easy as you'd like. It's all good. And also, in an ideal situation, what you would want to do is purchase whole bean coffee, and then you grind as you need your coffee. Reason being is that as the coffee bean is going through the grinder, it is, and being sliced, it's letting off oxygen, and oxygen is what's needed to make a nice cup of coffee. Think of flat pop versus, pop that you just opened and everything. So you can tell sometimes how fresh the coffee is. And then secondly, you want to make sure that your water that you're using is good tasting water. And for some methods that you might want to consider using spring water or using something through a water filter. And then third, make sure you take care of your coffee when you're not actively involved in brewing the coffee. So place it in as close to an airtight container as possible on a countertop. Keep it out of the fridge, out of the freezer. That was fine back in the days, but especially with more of these boutique artisan type coffee roasts and coffee varietals, you want to keep them at room temperature.
Okay. I think my dad still stores his coffee in the freezer.
I know. My grandmother did the same thing. Some things are tough to, it's years of doing something, so it's all good. Right. So yeah, the only other thing too that I would mention is that if and it depends on how technical you want to get into brewing coffee, but if you're using something like a French press like this, or a Chemex, or a dripper, it is helpful to use a digital scale. A lot of coffee roasters will put their recipes out in grams, but you can just do it in ounces. And that way it's sort of like that baking recipe. You're using the same amount of coffee, the same amount of water. You're replicating that time and time again. It's not a method for, not a way to prepare coffee for everyone, but that is an option too.
Okay. Can you brew some for us?
I certainly can. So I've got two nice ways of brewing coffee that aren't overly complicated, so to speak. And one is using this dripper system. So this is a Hario single cup brewing system that's from Japan. And it looks very similar to the Melita type coffee, single cup coffee brewer. So in a lot of ways, it's just sort of improving on or making their own unique twist on how coffee is brewed. Now, for this, you have to have water that's ready, that's hot, that's boiling, off boil. So you'll have to use a kettle separately. And so with this, what I'm going to do is I'm going to move my computer down so that you can see a little bit better what I will be doing. So I have a digital scale here. It's not required, but it is helpful. And I have already ground coffee here. It's a fine grind. You always want to match the, if you're grinding coffee on your own, match the grind style to the way the coffee is being brewed. That way you get the best flavor out of it. And so I have, back in the day, we used to do on-site coffee tastings. And so this is kind of my go-to brewing brew into device. And that's because usually I would share it with a number of attendees at a time. But what we're doing is we're basically stacking up the coffee brewer on to the little shuttle. And we've got the coffee filter here. Okay. So I've got my hot water and I just give it a quick rinse. What this does is for some individuals, they're very sensitive to taste. And so sometimes they can pick up a papery taste in the filter. For a lot of individuals, they're not going to encounter that, but for some, that will avoid it. And then also too, it starts to heat up the little dripper.
Okay.
So
you just dumped that water out that you poured in there?
I dumped it out. I have another little shuttle cup here.
Okay.
And yep, so I dumped that out. Now I am pouring the coffee grounds in, and it's resting on my digital scale here. So I'm just carrying it out to 0. And then I just pour just a little bit of coffee, or excuse me, a little bit of water into the coffee. And this will actually, can you see there's some bubbles that are appearing?
Mm-hmm.
So that also is a way to see whether or not your coffee is fresh. Okay. So if you have stale coffee, it won't do that. So then what you just do is just slowly pour over the coffee grounds, and you just let gravity do its thing. And it takes about 2.5 minutes to brew a single cup. And with this, for a lot of individuals, they want to experiment with different coffees. And so the ratio that we use is 1 ounce of coffee to 16 ounces of water, but you can also adjust it from there. But this here is the easiest way to brew a single cup outside of some of your automatic countertop coffee solutions.
That seems pretty simple.
Yep. Mm-hmm. And this is technology that's been around since like the 1880s. I think 1890s was when Melita came out. And so while this company is a Japanese company, there are loads of variations on it. And if you go online onto YouTube or just look at some of the resources online, there's not one that's better than the other. It just kind of depends what is best for your lifestyle and what you're looking for in your coffee.
Mhm. One important tip I thought you mentioned is just grinding what you need when you need it. So that keeps it fresher, the beans stay fresher, and then you're just grinding as much as you need each time you're going to do that, make that coffee.
Exactly, exactly. And so for this particular coffee brewing device, if you're someone who likes to have a little bit of more like what we call brightness in coffee, kind of like that pep on the tongue, this brewing method will amplify that. So that's another item to consider depending on what type of coffee brewer best fits your needs. The coffee will taste differently depending on how it's been ground, how it's been processed, so that's going back to the farm, and then finally how you brew your coffee. So you can have the same coffee brewed 5-6 different ways. It's going to taste completely different.
Wow. Okay. What about grinders? What do you recommend? You said even how you grind it.
Right. So for grinders, I would recommend Burr grinders, Burr.
Okay.
And you've got two different types. You've got a whirly blade type grinder that just kind of pops at the beans. With Burr grinders, the coffee bean will actually drop down between two shear plates, and you get a nice clean slice through your coffee bean. And so they're a little bit more expensive. You can find a whole spectrum of prices. It's like shopping for cars. And but I would suggest going, if you can, going with a Burr grinder.
Okay. Okay. How'd it turn out?
I mean, this is one of my favorite ways to brew coffee. So I sometimes travel with my my dripper, and basically what I would just do is just pour it in here into my cup, and yeah, sit back and enjoy. So yep. But this particular coffee is the one from Costa Rica, one of our direct trade coffees. And so what I like about it is that most of the coffee fruit stayed on the coffee beans during the processing. And so it's going to it has more body, more complexity. It's hard for me to sit around and have a cup of coffee and not be thinking about it. But this particular one is sort of my go-to coffee.
And what's that one called?
So that one is from Costa Rica, Finca Las Torres. And we actually have Luis and Esteban. These were the two gentlemen that came up to spend a couple of weeks with us. They were here during the month of September, huge Browns fans now. And so took them to the Steelers Browns uni lot, and yeah, good times.
That's a good experience, right?
Exactly. It was funny though, when I was back at the farm the season that the Browns didn't win, and I said, yeah, they had a parade in Cleveland, and no one else on the farm could understand why a parade would happen for a losing team, but these two were like, oh, let us tell you about this team.
Oh, that's good. They get to experience a little bit of our culture here, right?
Exactly. So yeah.
Okay, I have another question, Annie. This one is, how tall are the trees and how are they harvested? You said by hand, so they're actually out there in the field picking these beans right from the tree, right?
Exactly. So they are, well, if you go to a well-maintained farm, the coffee trees are about six, in some cases, nearly 7 feet tall. On some coffee varietals, most of our direct trade partners, they're they're cutting down their trees to a point that it's accessible for someone to hand pick. Now, there's two types of coffee varietals that are often, or not varietal, two species of coffee basically. You have Arabica, which is what we have. That's the only coffee that we roast, high elevation, very delicate. But you have Robusta, which is grown at lower elevations, higher caffeine content. And then there's another one called Liberica. You really don't see it in anywhere outside of like Southeast Asia or at some research farms. But if coffee is left on like just wild Arabica, it can grow upwards of 20, 25 feet tall and everything. So, but as the coffee beans mature, as they ripen, depending on the varietal, you can have anywhere from 50 to 200 little individual coffee beans or coffee cherries on the tree. They look like little cherries, like almost like cranberries, but they call them coffee cherries. And you have to pick them at the appropriate ripeness. So for most, it was interesting. I was at a farm and they had asked me to go out and help with the picking. And they said, well, we want it to be red. So I'm like, okay, yeah, bright red or deeper red. So I went out and I harvested, picked what I thought, came back and I said, well, this is a good start, but it's really not red, what we are looking for. And so we're going back and forth in Spanish. And then they started saying, well, no, it's sangre de toro. It's like the blood of bulls is the color that we're looking for. And I'm like, I'm not, what are we actually looking at? Well, it's more of like in this particular case with these trees, it was more of a deep red purplish color.
Okay.
So it's tough to do. It is very, very tough to pick.
Wow. That's how long is that harvest season last then when they're picking these? So it must take time before they can harvest all of this.
Exactly. Now there's some countries I would mention like Brazil, because where that's grown, it's in the Cerrado. It's a more of a flat area. They do have mechanical harvesters that go out and they kind of beat up the coffee trees. So you do see some mechanization, but it's by and large, when you're at a coffee farm in a land like this, you have to use, human labor. And so last week in Costa Rica, in the West Valley, they started harvest. And it's the beginning part of the season. And they are looking at possibly wrapping up harvest in February or early March. So lower elevations is when the crop first ripens, and then the higher you go up the mountainside, it's a little bit later. So that's why typically February is when I'm in Costa Rica meeting with our producers.
Okay. Wow, that's a long time. So Annie, getting back to the brewing, so the drip coffee method you just did, how fine did you brew that? Did you grind that coffee for that? Is that a fine grind?
It's a fine grind, and sometimes on the dial, depending on your coffee grinder, you might have a cone setting. It's basically kind of between your standard drip, auto drip setting, and espresso. It's between those two settings.
Okay.
But unfortunately, there's not a whole lot of uniformity when it comes to the manufacturing of brewing equipment.
Okay.
But you want to go finer.
Okay. What about when you're doing a French press method then?
Okay. So a French press, you're going to need a coarse grind, and it's synonymous with, French press, coarse grind. It's the same style that's used for your cold brew coffee. And one of the reasons why it's ground coarse is that in your French press, you have a screen and you don't have a paper filter. So with that Hario system that I have with the Melita-like brewing system, there's a paper filter involved. And so with the French press, you always want to have coarse grind coffee. You will get a little bit of sediment at the bottom of your coffee cup. That's just what happens because the coffee is not going through a paper filter.
Mhm.
So with this, we just use our same scale again. And a lot of times you'll find the glass uh, French presses, but there's a company called Planetary Design. They make fabulous stainless steel French presses. That's what I travel with. And I have one that's like 15 years old that I'll take when I travel overseas. TSA has yet to destroy it. So I swear, it's been thrown off of trucks. It's gone down hillsides, that sort of thing. And it still lives on to brew another day.
And tell me what that brand was.
Planetary Design.
Okay.
And they are out of Montana. We carry their French presses here in our retail space, but it's, if you break a glass carafe, it's tricky to find a replacement one at that point. With Planetary Design, you're buying one and one and done basically.
Great. Okay.
So yeah, so with the French press coffee, I'm using the same brewing ratio as I did for the Hario system, using an ounce of coffee grounds. And so what we're going to do here is we just pour the coffee grounds into the bottom. And I've got water that's already been heated. And so the whole idea is to try to get as much of the coffee grounds saturated with water early on. So I've got 16 ounces here. This is a much larger press, but I just give it a quick stir. You can see there's a little bit of some crust that comes up to the top here. And we're just kind of getting that all tucked in. And then when I replace the lid here, I just keep it down just at the surface here. And this will sit for about 4 to 6 minutes. It basically depends on how strong you want your coffee. And what's nice about the French press is that it's easy to clean. If you do composting, you can just give it a quick rinse and toss your grounds into your compost pile. And a lot of chefs like this brewing method because it's a good way to balance a dessert at the end of the meal with a nice cup of coffee. You're going to have coffee oils that are going to coat the tongue. So if you think on if you're having a cheesecake, a slice of cheesecake as part of your dessert, you want to have kind of a type of coffee that's going to stand up to that coating of the fats and everything on your tongue. It's like I said, it does take a little bit longer to brew. You're going to be waiting for, like I said, 4 to 6 minutes. This is how I start off my day when I brew my first cup of coffee. And you can use a digital scale, you can eyeball it, kind of depending on how busy you are and that sort of thing. But it's a nice way to slow down and enjoy your coffee.
There's no Keurig system in your house, right?
No, there isn't. I have to say though, my kitchen, it almost resembles a chemistry lab because you do get coffee brewing pieces of equipment that look like siphons and chemists that look like they belong in a chemistry lab. So someone comes over and I have to think like, okay, what do I want to do with this coffee? And, first off, are they going to appreciate it or not? Because I mean, you can get really, really elaborate and
right.
Someone might say, oh my gosh,
There might be a little pressure on you to serve the best cup of coffee ever when people come over.
Yeah, but the French press for me, this is my favorite way. And I first got introduced to this in college. And so even as a busy college student in the dorms, this was the way I was brewing my coffee.
Wow. So can you do that when you're doing this? Can you do multiple cups at a time in the French press, or are you doing just 1 cup at a time?
You can do more. So for a lot of our recipes, when we're doing tasting events, we have that 1 to 16, 1 to 15 ratio. And so what you have to do, depending on the coffee brewer, kind of look to see what they're using as their standard unit of measurement for a coffee cup. So
Okay.
industry standard, six ounce, your fine china type coffee cup. Now Chemex will use a 5 ounce one for their standard unit of measurement, but by and large, like if I were to do basically double up the recipe for this here, this would be enough coffee for a travel mug.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. That's a lot of coffee. Are there questions that people have that you want to ask Annie while she's brewing her French press here? Let's see if we had any more. I'm trying to keep up with them as people were asking along the way. I don't see any other questions. So Annie, once you press that, then how do you maintain, I know you said you're going to have some grounds. Does it have a little strainer as you're pouring that out? Once you do press?
Yeah, yes, there is. But it depends on the manufacturer. So Bodum has a screen, but because you're not pouring through a paper filter, you're going to have some runaways that are going to make it into your cup. Planetary Design, they've got what's called a brew stop, which is a plate that rests above their screen. So when you press it down, it completely separates the coffee grounds from the brewed coffee above. And so then you can just, at your leisure, just pour the coffee that you need off the cup. But yeah, you're always going to have a little bit of some sediment, and also too the color is going to look a little bit different too. It's not unusual to be able to identify a French press coffee when it's been brewed, because you have a layer of coffee oils at the top.
Okay. So Jody has a question or a comment here. A woman after my own heart. She said, Annie, this was very interesting, and I don't drink coffee. Annie and I had this conversation ahead of time. I love the smell of coffee. I couldn't wait to be a grown up and be able to drink it, and I just didn't like the taste of it. She said, to be social, I tried with a half a cup, not mug, of coffee. The top half was cream or milk, finished with sugar. That was before sugar was bad. The last time as I walked home from my neighbors, I had to look at my hands to see if they were shaking. That was the last time I tried to be sociable by drinking coffee. Still, this was very interesting, and I appreciate your taking the time to educate us. And John wants to know, how do we measure coffee without a scale? How many tablespoons to an ounce?
Okay, yeah. So that is where you're basically sort of eyeballing it, and it depends on how strong you want your coffee. So it's there is a little bit of some leeway in that. I like a stronger cup of coffee. So if I'm putting in scoops on my French press, I have a much smaller French press, and for some coffees, I'm using 4 tablespoons. Sometimes I'm using 5. It depends on how much I'm brewing and what I want to get out of the coffee. I don't typically drink a whole lot of light-bodied medium roast coffees. I drink on occasion, but not necessarily my go-to. But I will mention that if I am going out to the beach in the summertime and I want to have a cup of coffee before I go out, I go to those lighter medium roast coffees, and I add more coffee grounds to it, just because that's like I said earlier, it's hard for me to just sit down and have a cup of coffee without thinking about it. So on that, it really comes into what it is that your taste buds, what you like, and then also too, if you're adding cream, sweetener, half and half, that also can change the recipe, so to speak, for you.
Annie, I'm going to share my screen with everyone so that people can get information on where you're located. Hoping that everyone can see this. So you're on Bagley Road in Berea, and you can also order online. I know you talked a little bit about that. How can people, if they're interested in coming in and getting coffee, can you give a little advice on how they go about doing that?
Sure. So, and our retail spot that we have on West Bagley Road, you're not going to be in the area where our coffee production is occurring. So, which is actually a good thing because then we're able to hear everyone because sometimes in the roasting area it is quite loud. But when you come in, you'll be able to packet or purchase packaged coffee. We're not a coffee shop in the traditional sense of lattes, brewed cups of coffee, that sort of thing. We are in the process of working on building out a new production area just down the road from where we're currently located, and that will have a cafe for brewed beverages. But if you're looking for coffee brewing equipment, looking for holiday gifts, we've got quite a bit of a selection to choose from. Everyone's super knowledgeable on coffee. We love talking, coffee and that sort of thing. And this space here that I'm in is sort of our mail room, our corporate gift and holiday gift area. So this is where we're packing any of those holiday gifts. But if we do offer contactless curbside pickup, so if you give us a call, we can set your coffee order out when you arrive in the parking lot. We have a little stand next to our front door. If you order online, you can choose to have the coffee shipped to you, or you can choose to have it picked up through the contactless curbside pickup. And then we are limiting the amount of customers that can come in for social distancing at this point. So yeah, we've got kind of a couple of different tiers of service.
That makes it easy for everybody, right?
Exactly.
Hopefully safe for everyone as well. I'm going to stop sharing it, and thank you so much. I don't know if anyone had any last minute questions before we wrap up today. That was a great experience to be able to see you at work.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, there was a question, where do we buy your coffee? So hopefully we just answered that question as well. Annie, thank you so much for taking the time with us today. I know you have a really busy schedule right now, and it's a busy season, so we appreciate you taking the time. Only wish we could smell that coffee and even have a taste. But stop by and check out Red Cedar Coffee and enjoy a great cup of coffee during this season. Annie, thank you again. Appreciate it. It was great to see you, and appreciate you spending time with us today.
Thank you, Lynn. Thank you, everyone, for attending. This has been wonderful. Thank you so much.
Awesome. Thank you. Have a great weekend, everybody.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye.